Friends, colleagues, and listeners, for those of you who can see the screen, you're going to see two men, one probably more familiar than the other. However, the two people I'm talking about now, and I'm so pleased to have them on the show, is Ram Menon Sr. and Ram Menon Jr. And this is the first time we've had a father and son on the show. And we're going to find out now whether or not it was a great moment that Junior came into the business or not. Let's see. But firstly, gentlemen, lovely to have you on board. Great to see you again, Ram, and always a pleasure to see you, Ram.
Good morning.
All right,
Thank you, Chris.
I don't know what the term is for a collection of rams, so I'm just gonna leave it there. Well, I've got a brace of rams. I'm surrounded by rams, so I really I'm looking forward to this. So first of all right, so I'm going to start with Ram Senior. Ram, you're looking very, very relaxed, my friends, and I think we've got a first here. We've got a little bit of an announcement about your new business venture, which is called Uncle Sam's No Stress Cream, because I cannot see a wrinkle on your face, my friend. How have you managed to do that?
Cream works very well, mate. I mean, you should try retirement, and it might do you the same thing. You know, all the wrinkles disappear and the stress disappears. You know, the world looks beautiful, more beautiful than what it was.
Ram, I wish I could do that. I was at the duty free, and Kathy, I asked Kathy, I said, "Do you need anything?" She said, "Yeah, if you can get me some cream." So it was Clarins or something. So I went up to one of the ladies that's always hovering there, and I said, "Have you got any Clarins?" And she said, is it for you, sir?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Yeah." She said, "It's probably too late anyhow." So she said, "Who's it for?" So that was an honest opinion. I think I'm beyond saving, my friend.
Hey, you should try the retirement card.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see. I'm sure lots of people are saying I should as well, but I've still got a little bit of oomph left. Now, Ram, I want to start with you. Right? So it's always popular having you on the show, and always, people have got such fond memories. What I just want to ask you now, first of all, how did you feel when your son said, "Dad, do you know something? I'm going to get into the same industry"?
Well, there's a story behind that. When he was growing up, he had actually said that he will never come into the business that I am in. And I had no idea what was going on behind the scene because I was still working in Dubai and he was in Luxembourg. And while he was waiting for the homologation of his degrees that he had, so he sort of did a temp with Wallenborn. And I think he can explain it much better than I can. And he sort of went in there, and for a few months, he thought he will do an internship. And guess what? Couldn't get him out. So when he picked up the phone and called me that he's working for Wallenborn, I said, "You what?" He said, and all he said to me was, "Pull of the jeans."
I can imagine.
That was it.
Yeah, but also, so Ram Junior. I mean, I think of characters in the business, France is one that I'm sure that's a great experience working for him and with him.
100%. So France and I, we clicked the first time we met, and I think, like a lot of people in logistics, I ended up in it by default. It was absolutely not my plan. Just it was fortuitous the way it went. What Dad does fail to mention was when I told him that, he said, "Are you sure? Are you really sure? Because once you step in, you will never leave." And in my head, I mean, you're what? You're 22 years old. You think that you know more than everybody else? And yeah, you're just chatting rubbish. It's fine. No worries. I'll go in. I'll go out. Won't stay there long because I have a vision and a mission of what I wanted to do. And well, 10 years on, I'm still in the industry. I've come back to the company, as we call it, the boomerang, came back here, and I'm loving it. And yeah, Frans Wallenborn is a titan of the industry. And I'm lucky to be with him and learning from him and being able to be in a position to also have an influence on his company.
Yep, no, and I'm sure you will have as well, and you already have done. And having a position of Group Chief Commercial Officer is a fantastic position. And if you don't mind me saying, also at such a young age. So it's a reflection of who you are and what you've done and what France sees in you.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I consider myself lucky every day.
Beautiful. And also, like I said to you when we hooked up in Brussels, your humility as well is exceptional. And I think without your old man standing there, irrespective of the cream, I'm sure he's absolutely brimming with pride. Wouldn't that be correct, Ram?
Well, I'm very, very proud of what he has turned out to be. And one thing I see in him is the passion and the fire, not just for what he's doing for his company, but also to the industry. I think, I mean, the brief period that he spent with Amazon, I think it was a great learning school for him, and he had actually become a go-to person there. So it just shows that it's not just what the task on hand; it's
Yep.
task around him, the environment around him that he needs to keep pushing forward.
Yeah. And Ram Junior, do you ever tap Ram Senior? I'm this Rams. I love all this Ram. Do you ever tap Ram Senior up for a little bit of advice every now and again?
I do, and it's always interesting because we have conversations where you you call it the new school versus old school, let's say, discussion, where there are similarities to what dad went through and how things were handled, especially from a people point of view, but then there are also a lot of differences. So it's more of a, I would say, open discussion, and also, let's say, in getting feedback from dad, and a bouncing board. The luck that I have, to be perfectly honest, and I think that's also a reason as to why I am where I am in my career, is that I had the support of both my parents, both mom and dad, and that I always bounce things off them. We have open discussions, open discourse, and then find the solution, right? So it was never really a one-way street for me. And they were, as my dad likes to say, they were always my safety blanket behind, but that was in the beginning, and now it was about taking risks. And I do believe in the no risk, no fun philosophy, right? You got to risk it for the biscuit and see where you can go. And then by doing so, by having open discussion, and also basically leveraging their knowledge, because dad is the titan, but mom was there as well and supported dad. So having that conversation with the both of them, it's worth a lot, right? So it's open-ended conversations, and advice is always given. Yeah.
Yeah, no, lovely, lovely, and as expected. And just on a point there, now some of the issues or some of the challenges that you're finding now, and irrespective of whether that be in Vellenborn or from your industry experience and exposure, and also with Amazon, what similarities do you see that are still happening now that your dad would relate to as well?
I think people is always going to be the starting point, right? The challenges back then, the challenges today is finding the good people, motivating the good people. Technology, to a certain extent. I mean, if you look at the industry, so if we take air freight as an example, as the core industry, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that today is still the same that it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago from a tech perspective.
Yeah,
So an evolution is necessary. And I know that back in the day, and I don't mean it in a derogative way, but a bit further back, there were discussions about how to optimize and how to become more efficient. And those topics are still relevant today because it hasn't really gone through the cycles that it should have. When you compare it to other industries, e-commerce, the postal networks, where you have visibility, traceability, all those kinds of things, air freight is behind. So I would say that would be one of the biggest talking points, or should be one of the biggest talking points of today, because it's still relevant.
yeah, yeah. I know it's relevant or not. Definitely, but I'm just thinking now, if I could look into the future, and I'm going to ask Ram Senior whether he thinks Ram Junior would be facing the same concerns if he comes into the industry in another 15 or 20 years.
I
Ram?
think, Chris, I think Ram is absolutely right. I mean, the issues that we have been talking about for years and years and years. I mean, I sometimes I look at pick up a conference agenda, and I see same issues being discussed again and again and again. And Ram is absolutely right, because we have been very, very behind the curve in adapting to technology. The COVID situation has changed that a bit, and now people are a lot more receptive to making that change. But if you go back to the our days, Chris, I mean, it was same thing. The agent slash forwarder slash intermediary. I mean, they're having several names. And then came the first mile, the middle mile, and the last mile, a kind of situation. This is the evolution of the terminologies. But if you actually look at it, the process is still the same.
Yeah.
It has not actually achieved the level of changes that it should. Digitization is probably the key to everything else. So generations like Aram coming in, they are a lot more technology friendly, and they are more adaptive to the changes. And I'm hoping that as we go forward, they will push those changes. And we built the foundation. Now they are going to start building the superstructure on top of that
Yeah,
foundation.
yeah, I'll go with that. Ram Junior, one of the things I want to pitch to you, and obviously Ram Senior jump in as well. One of my brothers, he's got his own air freight company, and unfortunately, he bounces things off me sometimes, and he gives me a right ear bashing because of things not being done, especially from the customer experience perspective, and having many parties in the process chain, but that they don't seem to have the same transparency and the same information that's available for the customer. So Ram Junior, you know, how are you guys addressing that? And especially, and I do feel for you in the you know, on the road transportation side, because you're sometimes pulled and pushed and left to take up the, you know, the slack, so to speak. So how do you feel that's going to improve now over the next few years?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think I know as well what your brother mentioned because I had him on the phone in December. But I think the fundamental starts with education, right? If you look at air freight and you look at RFS, an origin customer does not necessarily know that RFS exists, right? So if they're booking their shipment from Los Angeles to LHR, right? And it lands in Frankfurt or in Luxembourg and then gets trucked to London, they don't know about that. So they think it's flying from point A to point B, gets delivered, and that's it. So I think there's an education piece that's missing because when you then try to explain to them, yeah, it's on the road, it's delayed because of the Eurotunnel, or you have what have you, you have weather reasons, all this and that. It causes a lot of friction because in the first instance, they weren't even aware that this was happening. Then if they go via an agent or whomever, they don't really get clear answers either because there is no transparency, because there is still this certain air of hiding because RFS is not really that spoken of. So the challenge for us as well, if we're talking from a trucking point of view, we are the smallest part in the chain. So we're the ones that get squeezed from every end, right? If it comes to a claim or an issue or what have you, we're the first ones they're going to come to because we're the easiest ones to hit. So we have to protect ourselves at all costs. And this is why if you look at it from an end-to-end supply chain point of view, as if I speak for Vollenborn, one of our biggest focuses is telematics and visibility and transparency, because transparency is a knife that cuts both ways. I'm a firm believer that if you are transparent, if you're good, you're good. But if you're bad, it's visible as well. But it forces you then to optimize and to correct the actions, right? If there are things that are going wrong, you need to fix it. And this is what we give to our customers as well. It's that transparency, because if they don't have it, then assumptions are made, and assumptions are subjective rather than objectivity, which is data and transparency. So we go with that, and it's using, to what Dad said before, it's a digitalization aspect of it. GPSs exist for everything. So you can have it as well for the trailers, and you offer that to your customer, and then it opens up, let's say, an avenue of discussion that takes away a burden from us when the airlines or the GSAs or whomever are not answering the questions. They come to us because we'll give them the answer.
Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah, good one. And Ram Senior, something else that I'm sure you're very familiar with and you remember and is still there at the moment. Now, whether it's a forwarder or a customer or whoever the transport company is that's coming in for collections or drop-offs, the queuing times now and the delay times that's hitting them is substantial. And their driver, they don't get paid for that queuing and waiting times. And then all of a sudden drivers are out of their, you know, their prescribed or allowed hours, and then something else has to change. And it has such a knock-on effect, but there doesn't seem to be an appreciation or awareness or a transparency of how that affects the end experience of the ultimate customer. Now, that's been around for years, Ram, and depending on the location and the infrastructure, it's terrible in some places, it's better in others. But even awareness from, you know, warehouse staff and handling agents of people who just want to come in with one or two or smalls, they don't seem to even get a bypass or a higher priority to come in and drop off. How are we going to address that as an industry? Because that's a huge problem, and it also reflects, you mentioned earlier about the introduction of the first and last mile, but the conundrum or the sort of black hole area is the middle mile.
Well, Chris, I mean, a lot of, although things have gotten a lot better right now, if you look at 15 years back, I mean, the truck queues outside a cargo warehouse, that's gotten a lot better with a bit more better slot management. But fundamentally, the problem that we have in our industry is that we have several elements within the industry. You have the logistics, you have the procurement, from procurement down to all the way to the end customer. There are several processes in there. Now, in a supply chain management, ideally, you need to work on a collective efficiency. But what happens is a lot of these elements, because they are not talking to each other, or there's not much of a seamless communication, they try to create efficiency for themselves.
Yeah.
And when they create efficiency for themselves, they might end up creating inefficiency for the next part of the process. And what happens is that process then takes that inefficiency and makes it more inefficient. So collectively, we end up with a very inefficient chain. So it is, it's something that. Sorry about this thing. I think I'm getting these calls coming in.
No, don't worry, don't worry. It's real time, Ram, and it shows that it's real.
Yeah. So basically, so you get collective inefficiency. The only way you can get rid of that collective efficiency is to have a better dialogue, a better understanding of the interface points.
Yep.
So you can have, for example, I mean, you had the airplane coming in, you had the ground handling agents, very efficiently moving your cargo out into the land side for collection. But where do the bottlenecks happen? At the security gates, customs. That is still an issue. And that is an issue that we have been trying to deal with. We have been talking about this for several years, but it's gotten a lot better. So, I mean, I cannot really say that, that progress has not been made, but it's not enough. I think this is where, when going forward, the only way I see, and I've been preaching that for a long, long time, is digitization. Take the human beings out of the equation.
Yeah.
As much as possible, and then let the machines do the communication. And I think that will speed up, and not only speed up, create better efficiencies.
Yeah.
And those efficiencies work on hand in hand chain.
Yeah.
So this is where I see the younger generation who are coming in, embracing that, living in a digitized world, pushing that digitization ahead. And I think we'll get there. We'll get there. I mean, it's just a matter of time. But one of the few issues that we did not have to address in the past is the environmental issues. So that new factors which are coming in, they are weighing in a lot on the public. So as you are trying to create an efficient chain, you need to make sure that it's a green chain.
Yeah, or as green as possible.
And Ram sort of mentioned that at every stage, whenever you're trying to achieve something like that, there is a cost involved in there. Now, in our business, and I've seen that for years and years and years, Chris, I mean, you're the same. People try to make a buck out of each other. We should stop doing that. That's the only way you do that. You get remunerated for the services that you have provided. Once you get into that kind of situation, instead of making a commission from here, a commission from there, just put it out, transparent. I mean, you did this part of the work, and you get remunerated for that accordingly.
Yeah.
Once you are onto that, your mindset changes, and you're more receptive to make the change more efficient.
Yeah. No, I mean, things will change, and again, I said we don't want to be down on what's going on, but they're real issues. And coming back to what you were saying about customs and security, etc., and Ram Junior, from your perspective, with the way AI is moving forward now, and how it can forecast and have predictability elements in it. I mean, that surely is a way now of speeding up the administrative and the bureaucratic process that's there at the moment.
It is if we specifically talk about customs, it is if the governments play along, right? But I think public institutions are sometimes ahead of the curve, but a lot of time behind the curve. And if we use, for example, we can use a real example now. We had in Frankfurt, they changed to the new customs system, or they updated it in the Q3 or Q4 last year, and it was a disaster because it was just not ready. They weren't ready for it. The backlog went over 24 hours. You had trucks that were blocked. It just wasn't, there wasn't a real business continuity plan put into place, or contingency management. So I do believe that we can get better with technology, but it has to be used correctly and implemented in a way where the industry is also spoken to, right? Because public institutions are the heroes of lone warriors, of doing their own thing and then telling the industry what they have to do, instead of speaking to the industry, or better said, consulting the industry, getting feedback and having joint rollouts where it makes sense and you have a system that's stable. I think that touched on the point of the environment. This is again exactly the same thing. If we talk about Europe, you've got the EU institution, the EU Commission, forcing something into the industry which is not necessarily in the best interest of the industry, and can be quite damaging. So it's about that dialogue. So it's the cohesion as well. So when we talk about the industry and all the players within the industry, yes, we should be having that collective spirit, but that applies to government as well and public institutions. It all needs to work together, because you can't, one hand washes the other, right? And without both parties working together or working in synergy, it's silos, different silos trying to compete with each other, thinking and making assumptions rather than talking concretely and coming with concrete outputs.
Yeah, no, I agree there. That's a good point.
Chris, I mean, Ram is absolutely right when it comes to governmental agencies. And, 9/11 changed everything. I think the biggest challenge since 9/11 that we were facing was the security issues, clarity of the security issues, and having a common set of security processes. But those knee-jerk reactions when something happens, that just destroys all the efficiencies that you have gained.
Yep.
Now, again, Ram sort of mentioned, I mean, when you are creating systems, you're creating building systems. I mean, like, for example, the customs in Germany. How much dialogue has gone with the rest of the people in the chain? Every country is different, every environment is different, but there are certain common threads. Are we following those common threads and just building the what you call it, the variations as per the local requirement? I mean, I call it a globalization, globally localizing. But you need to have a common thread, because we are dealing in international businesses.
Yeah.
We go distances, we cross borders. And if every border has got its own idiosyncrasies, as long as it's a variation of a common theme, it can be dealt with.
Yeah.
But if it's not, then you get into a situation, because half the time we are chasing our own tails, trying to find out what those nuances are that we need to build in.
Yep. Yep, no, I agree. I agree. And I'm just thinking now, Ram, you know, in the old days when the integrators first came on, everybody was saying, oh my God, how can they do things so simple and easy? And they had a chance because they had a whiteboard, blank canvas to say, right, well, this is what you need to do. If you don't do this, we can't do that, etc. And now you've got the e-commerce impacts, and some people would say it's not an equal playing field, with the way regulatory criteria is on traditional cargo and then on e-commerce. And from a safety perspective, we all know, certain things, get put into e-commerce packaging, etc., that shouldn't be there, and for whatever reason. So, how do we level up the playing field?
I think, and this comes back to a point that was mentioned before. It's a valid point and a valid concern that you've raised, right? Because if you have something that's marked as general cargo, if you have it as e-commerce on the ABB, it's handled differently. I do have to say though that the customs agencies are getting stricter now with e-commerce. They are doing a lot more inspections. The findings are also super interesting. It confirms what we all suspected anyway. But the biggest challenge of it all is, if you look at it from, let's just talk security, right? If I look at it from my AFSEC perspective,
Yep.
you have something that is mandated by the EU, but it's left to interpretation, right?
Yes.
So you have why are a lot of e-commerce why is a lot of e-commerce volume flying into Budapest rather than in Amsterdam? Because it's interpreted differently there. It's a bit easier, or the customs are a bit more lax. You can get it through. Whereas in a more traditional setup, where it's a bit stricter, they're getting controlled, inspected, also taken to the side and held. So the challenge to it all is the interpretation aspect of it. And if you take the EU, the regulatory body, it will never be clear. They are purposely vague, or vague enough that every member state can then interpret it in their own right and then implement it as they see fit, because it's their prerogative to do so. And that's the biggest challenge, because until we have a clear line that everybody needs to follow, there are always going to be the rogue warriors who do what they want and then make it easier for certain things to happen rather than in other cities or airports.
Yeah, exactly. And do you think there could or should be more upstream responsibility or accountability, whereby at the front end customers are having to declare more and be more aware of what the outcomes could be if they don't do things correctly, whether it be through ignorance or intent?
There need to be consequences, but if you look at the actual situation from a customs point of view, they don't have the manpower to do the inspections that are needed anywhere. When they do, the burden of work is so large and so vast with the volumes coming in. It's a drop in the ocean of what they're doing. So there may be consequences. Liège was an airport, for example, that went through this, and they brought severe consequences and fines out. And since then, things have gotten better. But without consequences, there will be no change. So yes, upstream there needs to be real consequences. The origin shippers need to be fined for what they're doing if they're putting undeclared DG in the volume or what have you, anything like that. That in the traditional sense, if that happened in traditional cargo, the consequences would be severe and immediate. Whereas in e-commerce, for example, it's a bit the lines are a bit blurred because it's a gray zone. It's hard to kind of define who is the real owner of it, getting all the information, and then actually seeing the consequences going through, because you may not have any influence on the country of origin where this happened. So it's a tricky situation.
Yeah, no. I agree. Now, Ram,
It is a circle of life. You brought in the integrators and the traditional operators in the past, having a go at each other. Now the integrators and the e-commerce operators are doing the same thing.
yeah,
So it's interesting because when you look at it, just listening to Ram also, the fundamental issues still remain. It is the same as we have had in the past, and they're going through the same thing as they're going forward. And the key challenge seems to be communication and interpretation of rules.
yeah,
I mean, so if we can sort of fix that, then we probably can start evolving into the next dimension.
Yeah.
And there are now associations like TIACA who are getting more active, and they are basically they have a membership which includes all elements of the supply chain. If we can create a common source of interpretation, now we as operators can have, it's easy for us to do that. But when it comes to the governmental levels, I think that's where the challenge is. And that's what I said. Once you automate, once you digitize, you take the human beings out of the equation. Let so once the in a digital world, they're dealing with digital similarity, similar interpretation. And that's when we really start evolving.
Yeah.
Up until that time, I think, I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but looks like the next generations are also going through the same kind of issues that we've been dealing with.
Yeah, no, true enough. And talking about generational experiences, one of the things that Ram Jr. mentioned was about continuity and contingency and, having consistency. And then in our day, Ram, you look at certain things and you think, my God, that was a terrible experience. But you have the experience of going through the problem. And I think at the moment now, passing on experience. So just take, for example, the older generation. Everybody keeps saying needs to be replaced by the younger generation, which is inevitable anyhow. But if you could marry the two up, and as people were leaving the industry or leaving their jobs, etc., if they felt valued leaving, it would give a better impression for them and everybody else associated with them. But they would also have to understand that they have to pass on valuable experience, not just talk about their experience. And if the younger generation are able to get that experience without having to go through the pain, I think that's a nice way forward for the industry, because when you look at certain worst case scenarios, the one thing that you mentioned, Ram, was about how COVID sped up the process between stakeholders, authorities, and everybody else. And it did show what could be done. But people didn't spend as much time as they should have done on worst case scenarios, risk assessments, etc. And then all of a sudden, woof, because if something hits you, it hits you so much faster now.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Again, I'm not trying to beat up the industry, because the industry has done a lot of good things.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, I mean, we keep on having this gravitational force of what Ram called it, interpretation of rules. I think you got all the processes all aligned, but the interpretation is interfering. These are hurdles that we are having to jump.
Yeah.
How can we remove that? How we have a common understanding? I mean, we've been talking about it for the last 20, 25 years, 30 years. And I'm sorry to see that the young and new generations are also facing the same thing. So we haven't really addressed the root cause of the problem. Now, how can we do that? And you said you're absolutely spot on, because you have the senior citizens with the experience of what they have gone through, and the new generation who are a lot more open-minded and faster to react, to move forward. How can they benefit from that experience?
Yeah.
So there has got to be some forum somewhere where the younger generations can actually tap into a source where they can tap into a kind of a, I don't know, I can't call it a mentorship, but a knowledge base that you create somewhere that they can actually access easily, that the base. Or something like, I mean, there used to be a platform, I think it still exists, allexperts.com, right? So do we have something like that specifically for the cargo industry. When I'm saying cargo industry, I'm not just saying air freight, trucking, or ocean. I'm talking for the entire industry.
Yep.
If we can create something like that, if somebody could create something like that, that would be a great help to the next generation, where
Yep.
they can just ask a question. It doesn't matter what who they're addressing it to. They have an issue. They want some experience, some past knowledge of how, if somebody has gone through that, has dealt with. Wouldn't that be a nice thing?
You're on mute, Chris. Chris.
So yeah, so I don't know what happened there, but yeah, it's almost like an experience bank where people can make deposits, and then anybody who likes those deposits can make a withdrawal at any time that they think they need to assess.
Yeah.
Before that'd be ideal.
I think so. If I can just add there, I think there's also there's two factors. Tribal knowledge is the biggest challenge, I think, across the board anywhere. When you don't have things written down or processes not established, a lot of what is done is hearsay or based on experience, but nothing's ever written down.
Yeah.
And then when you have the generational changes or what have you, people coming and going. I think this is something I experienced in Amazon. The sheer influx of people. So people come and they go, but if it wasn't written down, all of the knowledge left with the person. So you started from zero once again. So one thing that we need to get more rigid on and get more serious on as an industry is industry practices, but having it written down, standardized in an SOP or what have you, that you have guidelines that can be referred to. Because I agree that it's good to be able to refer to people and ask the question, but people, they come and they go. If something is written down, it's forever. So that's something that we need to get better at. I think everybody, it's something in my company as well. What we're doing is putting down what everybody has in their heads, all of the genius stuff that's there, but putting it on paper and making sure that it's immortalized to a certain extent. That somebody comes in, they don't need to go and refer to a person; they can refer to a section, a paragraph, what have you. And then the second point, I think the biggest challenge is the generational gap within the industry. Now, I went to the TIACA conference last year in Brussels. It was my first TIACA conference where we saw each other, Chris. And the one thing that really stood out to me was that a lot of people that I met there were all friends of Dad's, people that I grew up with, who were still in the same positions of leadership that they were 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Whereas the new generation, I would say my generation, the younger generation, there aren't that many people who are in positions of leadership. So it's also getting that chance of having the younger generation to step into roles, be guided by the experts and the masters of industry, but having that chance to also bring in their flavor of spice and changing the mix up a bit. Because as long as things are rigid and you don't get the opportunity to bring in, let's say, fresh perspectives or fresh thought, you're just perpetuating the same standards that have been going along for decades. So it's also that the opportunities that should be more prevalent within the industry of the younger generation, but there's also the archaic, let's say, thought process that if you're, I'll take myself as an example, right? I'm 34 years old by normal standards. I'm far too young to be in the position that I'm in now because I don't have the experience for the industry experience. I'm green behind the ears. Whereas in, let's say, the different, if you take an Amazon, the culture that we work at, the pace that we work at, we make jokes by saying 1 year equates to 3 years in the real world. So you have as well a change in the mentality and the modality of how things are going, and that more chances need to be given because we need to break the cycle of thinking in the traditional sense of how you are based on your age rather than your capabilities.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And what I'd like to do now for both of you is just bringing it into a close. Another challenge now is, and you mentioned this now about turnover, and in our day, Ram, it was probably, dead men's shoes. But what I'm seeing now is the amount of competence that has not only been validated, but has been verified for its practical capability seems to be missing. And there's a lot of tick box training exercises to fulfill certain criteria rather than have the knowledge that people can do it when they go into the practical workplace. And I think that's a big issue that that you, Ram, are going to have to deal with moving forward, and colleagues of yours and counterparts, etc., because the level of safety issues and competence issues is starting to creep up. Now, whether that's because we can't attract the people, whether it's because we can't keep people, whether it's because we're not paying enough, whatever the situation is, we've got to start focusing on practical capability rather than memory testing or online certification and certificates. And if we don't do that, and I think I would be correct in saying some of the trends and some of the examples we're seeing, especially some recently, they all have that tick box or that pressure where people don't do what they should have done, and it's still a people-focused exercise. That could cause an awful lot of problems moving forward, which could put a lot of things back, because regulatory directions will then come in and will make people do things differently.
I have to agree with that. I put a lot of value on education. I myself have gone through the cycle of it, but I always like to have the balance of theory and practice.
Yeah.
Now, in the world of today, you are not a credible candidate unless you have a master's degree in what have you, whatever, right? In 30 years ago, having a university education distinguished you from the pack. You were sought after. Today, it's a common commodity. A bachelor is worth nothing anymore. A master's is borderline. You want to stand outside of the pack, you need to have a PhD degree, which is all well and good. But the truth of the matter is, and I've done a lot of interviews over the years with people who came in highly educated, a lot of qualifications on paper, but when you scratch at the surface and you go a few layers in and you start bringing the practicality of things in, the actual day-to-day operations or scenarios, they crumble, because the book can teach you only so much, but it's the practice that comes in. Because theory is great. Theory is what you can call your guardrails or your guidelines. But the reality is that when you're on the terrain and when you're on the ground, especially in an operations world, things are always going to go wrong. And a book cannot teach you how to react with that. It's about dealing with issues, being creative, thinking outside of the box. That's the point of a higher education, is to show that you can think outside of the box, but then you get conditioned to a certain extent that you are limited by what you've learned, rather than just to finish that, something that my dad said to me the day that I graduated from my first master. He said, I said to him, right, I'm happy I finally stopped my education, now I can start working. And he said to me, no, you are entirely incorrect. Your education is going to start now. And true words were never spoken from that point of view, because every day I'm learning, right? But you need to get your foot in the door, you have to have all of these qualifications. But in the reality of the matter is, I would rather have somebody who's got 20 years of industry real experience than somebody fresh out of university with a master's degree, because the two, they both have their qualities of what could be better and what could be worse. But without that experience, it's all theory and you need to learn. So you have to start somewhere. So I think we set the bar too high on expectations of qualifications, rather than going and looking at what the capabilities of the person is and what they can actually deliver from an output point of view.
Yeah, no, and I think all good managers and people who mentored people and gave people an opportunity or seen something in somebody that they didn't think they had, it was from an awareness and an understanding that the practical guys who are actually, and when I say guys, I should say people, whether it's girls, guys, whatever, that they are the ones who are delivering day in, day out, 24/7. And all of us, no matter how old, we would have a pocket of names that we would say, do you know something? When we were working there, these people were the best ones at their job. Those are the people that need a lot of respect, and they're the ones that we need to keep in the industry to attract others, because they're also good at learning and helping multiply that experience. So I just want to ask both of you, do you think now would be a good time not to suggest that it's a refocus or a rebalance, but to introduce an effective industry apprenticeship whereby people went through certain, process, so they knew the business the way it should be, and then they got the chance also to start to rise up, and show their capabilities with some additional then, technical and leadership training to top up their practical knowledge and awareness of the business.
Yes.
If I can jump in here, Chris, back in 1994, 1995, this is where when we created Tiaka, we took a look at the industry in itself, and we said, right, everybody here has come in by default, and why not we try and get some educated people, no, sorry, fully trained and educated in logistics, so that they don't have to keep on reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
And historically, that's what we have been doing. So the efforts that we made during those days, I mean, a lot of the universities, colleges, and institutions embraced the idea and started creating these supply chain logistics and procurement related programs within their educational process. Now, this is all great. And what we found that as these guys were coming in fully qualified, fully educated, they didn't come to us. They went somewhere else
Yes.
in the
Yes.
industry, somewhere else in the chain. And the people who we need in our side of the business is educated as well as having a little bit of belt and braces experience,
Yep.
because a lot of our industry is still belt and braces, and we need to have a good understanding of that belt and braces. So what I'm saying is we need a theorist but also a streetwise person,
Yep.
and that's the kind of talent that we want to employ. But having said that, the issues are very similar in other industries too. If you
Yep.
go into manufacturing, they have severe shortage of skilled staff,
Yep.
skilled labor,
Yep.
or skilled manpower. That's the right word. So, how do we address that? I mean, we've been talking about it for the past 20 years, but I
Yep.
don't think we still have any solution to that. What Ram sort of created, said, I mean, can we create this repository somewhere
Yep.
of knowledge that people can pull in, pull out? So even when you even new person coming into our business can really fit in. Ram said, you have a bachelor's degree, but that bachelor's degree is not what the paper is written on. But can we attract educated as well as apprentices, various kinds of programs to get there, various levels of programs to get there? And if you go back, Chris, I mean, I'm sure you're the same as I was when we joined the airline. The first thing they said was, do not commit anything to your memory. All
Yep.
you need to know is where to look for, because rules change.
Yep.
So you should be able to refer to somewhere.
Yep.
So that if we can create that kind of environment where then we can pick people with the right attitude and bring them in, and give them a career path, I think that will work much better. But this is something that we need to seriously focus on, because 25, 30 years later, we haven't cracked it.
Yeah, I agree, and it's not a negative thing. It's just something
It's
that.
not a negative thing, no.
But if we don't do something now that marries up practical capability and competence with leadership learning and all the other theoretical issues, the one thing I look back on now, and I think such a lucky person, because I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. And I was lucky enough to join Lufthansa, and we had so many courses. We went to Zeeheim. You had international exposure because you met your colleagues from all over the world. You had contacts. You realized that the industry was global, and you had opportunities. If you were good at something, you could then go and work in another country, because wherever an aircraft lands, you've got all those associated elements. So it was fantastic. But I do feel now that it's the time to introduce an industry apprenticeship whereby if people stay and complete, and then they sign on for X amount of years, they get a sort of a loyalty and performance element. So they're improving their self asset value, but they're also getting rewarded financially. And I think if we marry the two, we've got a good chance of getting some great people in.
I think there's
Yeah.
also a factor that is often missed today. And if I look at your generation, right, all of you started at the bottom and worked your way up. That meant that when you were at the top, you knew exactly what the intricacies were on every single level. of your operations and had that know-how, right? I'm happy to have been able to do the same thing in Vollenborn, start at the bottom, work my way up, meaning that I know when my operations people talk to me, I know exactly what they're talking about. Maybe not in the same level of detail or expertise that they do, but high level, you know what they're talking about, so you can get on board and you can fix it. In the new world, that's something that Amazon, for example, does really well. Is any new manager, you spend a week in a fulfillment center where you go pick, you pack, you store, you do all of it. So you know what the front lines are doing. You know what that level, how it works. So you have an understanding of the operations and what's behind it. I think as well that companies, when they onboard new employees, it's if you're especially in your management role or in a senior role, you need to go down to right to the front line, spend some time there, get your hands dirty, understand the business that you're trying to run or be a part of, and then go and make the changes or be in the position that you're in. But coming in straight at the top without having that, let's say, real life or frontline experience is a mistake as well, because how can you look to improve or optimize a business that you've never been a part of or understood in its fundamental structural level?
Yep, no, totally agreed. And I think to end there as well, you know, practical people like to see management and especially senior management having an understanding and an appreciation of feet on ground. And without that, you can't run the business just by dashboards and trends and numbers. Obviously, they help, but that's not the case. Listen, gents, it's been an absolute pleasure. I think the one final message is this is a wonderful industry, and it's proven in the Menon household, because you've gone through two generations and you're both still smiling, both still enthusiastic, and to use your words there, Ram Senior, you're still full of passion and fire, which is something that everybody recognises. It's been an absolute pleasure to have a father and son in the same industry with similar points of view, great characters, great personalities. Ram Senior, always been a pleasure. Ram Junior, you know what I said to you in Brussels, even more endorsed now. Good luck with everything, and thank you both for coming on.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Chris. I mean, I'm really proud of what Junior is doing. And I think watch this space. Watch him.
Yeah. And don't forget now, don't be shy about letting everybody else know about the cream.
Yep. And Ram, no pressures.
Yeah. Uncle Ram's stress-free cream. Yeah. All right. That's good luck with everything.
Stress-free cream.
Yeah. And have a great 2024.